The Bozeman-Yellowstone International Airport was never silent, not even when the whole world outside was wrapped in thunder. That night, the kind of Montana storm that made the ground tremble had rolled in without warning, pinning hundreds of travelers inside the glass and steel terminal. Lightning forked across the dark horizon, briefly illuminating the tarmac and the restless faces pressed to the windows. Families clinging to vacation plans, business people refreshing flight trackers, couples sharing nervous glances. For most, it was just another travel inconvenience. But for Officer Michael Walker, it was a shift that already felt too long, and it had barely begun. Michael was a veteran of airport security, mid-40s, trim but broad-shouldered, with creases around his blue eyes that spoke of both laughter and sleepless nights. He wore the badge like old denim, with familiarity, with responsibility, and sometimes with a weight only other officers understood. His partner, however, moved through the chaos like he was born for it. Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd with intelligent dark eyes and a coat the color of storm clouds, padded at Michael's side. Most people only saw a police dog, but to Michael, Ranger was a survivor, a rescue with a nose for trouble and a heart that somehow, even after all he'd seen, still believed in the good in people. The PA system blared updates about delays and gate changes. A child cried somewhere near baggage claim. Michael scanned the crowds, his gaze flicking from one face to the next, Ranger's leash slack in his hand. He watched the dog's body language more than anything else. To Michael, years on the job had proven that a dog's instincts, when properly trained and respected, were better than any machine. Tonight, that instinct would prove itself in ways Michael couldn't yet imagine. At precisely 8:03 p.m., as another bolt of lightning crackled overhead and the terminal lights flickered, Ranger stopped cold. Michael felt the leash tighten and looked down, puzzled. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, following Ranger's stare. They were at Gate 14, near the far end of the terminal where the lights seemed to buzz a little louder. The crowd here was thick, a sea of rolling suitcases and anxious conversation. At the edge of it, a young woman stood cradling what appeared to be a bundled baby, her head bent low, hair hiding her face. She wore a fashionable trench coat, expensive boots, out of place among the rain-soaked travelers. Michael saw her, made a mental note, and started to walk past. But Ranger would not move. Instead, he stepped forward, blocking the woman's path. His hackles raised and a low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. The leash went taut. The woman stiffened, clutching the bundle tighter. "Ma'am," Michael said, his tone polite but firm, the way only an officer can be when he's trying not to make a scene. "Is everything all right?" The woman didn't look up, didn't speak. The baby in her arms was strangely still. No movement, no sound. Ranger's growl grew louder. Heads began to turn. A businessman frowned, pulling his suitcase closer. A teenage girl raised her phone, hoping to catch something dramatic on video. The tension in the air was sharper than the storm outside. "Ranger, heel!" Michael commanded. But the dog didn't budge. If anything, his body blocked the woman more insistently. I just need to get to my gate," the woman said, voice trembling. Michael noticed her grip tighten, knuckles white. The baby's blanket slipped a fraction, revealing a tiny, unmoving hand. Was it a hand? For a moment, Michael couldn't tell. Something about the angle was wrong. Ranger barked, sharp and urgent, startling the crowd. The bark wasn't aggression. It was alarm. He'd heard it before, usually right before something went terribly wrong. "I'm going to need you to stop right there," Michael said, stepping in front of the woman. "Can I see your boarding pass?" The woman's eyes darted left and right. She looked trapped, cornered by the storm and by the sudden attention of the crowd. It's in my bag. She stammered. Ranger lunged forward, barking again. This time, a chorus of cell phones lifted, capturing the moment. The woman stumbled back, nearly dropping the bundle, and for the briefest second, the blanket fell away. What Michael saw made his blood run cold. Beneath the soft fleece, a small, pale face, mouth taped shut, eyes closed but fluttering as if drugged. "Help! Someone help!" a voice shouted from the crowd. Michael's hand flew to his radio. "Security at Gate 14. I need backup. Possible child endangerment. Now!" The woman tried to push past, but Ranger blocked her, teeth bared, his body low and ready. Michael stepped between them, adrenaline flooding his senses. "Don't move!" he barked. I didn't do anything. I swear!" she sobbed, backing against the wall. The crowd parted, whispers spreading like wildfire. The baby, or was it a toddler, let out a muffled whimper. Michael's heart pounded as he reached gently for the child, but the woman clutched him tighter. "No, please, don't hurt him," she cried. "I'm not going to hurt anyone, but I need you to put the child down right now," Michael said, voice steady but urgent. "We can work this out, but you need to listen." She hesitated. The storm outside crashed louder, thunder shaking the glass. Every eye was on them, security, passengers, even the cleaning staff frozen mid-step. Finally, the woman's strength gave out. She sank to the floor, sobbing, and released her grip. Michael scooped up the child, feeling a rush of relief when he felt a pulse. Weak, but there. Ranger immediately sat beside the boy, eyes locked on the woman, never leaving her. The terminal, moments before noisy with frustration and impatience, now held a breathless hush. Michael cradled the child, checked for injuries, and spoke softly into his radio. "I need EMTs at Gate 14, now." As security poured in, Ranger remained on guard, his instincts vindicated. Michael looked at the woman, tears streaming, hands shaking, and knew the night was far from over. He met Ranger's gaze, silently promising to trust his partner's instincts from now on. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a different kind of tempest was just beginning to break. The storm outside seemed to mirror the chaos inside Bozeman Airport. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled over the terminal, and every face in the crowd at Gate 14 was locked onto Officer Michael Walker, Ranger, and the young woman now sobbing on the floor. Michael's hands were steady, but his mind raced. Protocol screamed at him to wait for backup, but instinct told him there was no time. Within minutes, airport security arrived, pushing through the gawkers with a sense of urgency Michael rarely saw. "Back up! Give them space!" barked Sergeant Allen, her presence immediately commanding order. 2 EMTs rushed forward, checking the limp child in Michael's arms. Ranger refused to leave Michael's side, standing over the little boy like a shield. The woman, face streaked with tears, made no move to escape. Her body was trembling, her eyes wild, darting from Michael to the crowd, then to the child, as if searching for a lifeline. Michael knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, what's your name?" She shook her head, refusing to answer, arms wrapped around herself. "Please, please, I didn't mean..." He needed help. I was just..." The EMTs worked quickly, examining the boy. "He's breathing. Pulse is weak. Looks sedated. Maybe drugged," one of them muttered to Michael. "We need to get him to the hospital now." "Go," Michael said, nodding as the EMTs loaded the small boy onto a stretcher. The boy's head lolled, eyes half open, barely responsive. "Is he your son?" Michael asked again, turning to the woman. She froze, lips parted but silent. Her eyes begged for mercy or forgiveness. Maybe both. Suddenly, a shrill alert blared across every phone in the terminal. It was the unmistakable chime of an Amber Alert. Instantly, dozens of screens lit up with the same urgent message. Missing child, Cody Evans, age 3, last seen in Bozeman, Montana, with an unknown female suspect. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Michael's blood ran cold as he stared at the image of the boy. Same brown hair, same chubby cheeks, now lying sedated on the stretcher. The woman began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest, eyes darting around for an exit. As the EMTs began to wheel Cody away, a new commotion erupted behind the security line. An older woman, mid-60s, silver hair frizzing in the humidity, was frantically waving her arms, her voice rising above the din. "That's my grandson! That's Cody! Please, let me through!" "Diane Evans?" Michael called, instantly recognizing the name from the alert. The woman burst through the crowd, tears streaming down her cheeks as she rushed to the stretcher. She fell to her knees beside Cody, stroking his hair and whispering his name. "Cody, sweetie. Grandma's here. It's okay. You're safe now." Diane's raw anguish was a sound Michael would never forget, a mix of relief, fear, and overwhelming love. The EMTs gave her a moment before hurrying Cody toward the exit, Diane at their side, the crowd parting in hushed respect. Back at Gate 14, the scene took a darker turn. Megan, the name she'd given when Michael pressed her earlier, suddenly bolted to her feet, shoving a startled security officer aside. She made a desperate dash toward a nearby emergency exit, her trench coat flaring behind her like wings, but Michael was already moving, Ranger at his side. He cut her off before she made it 10 feet, catching her by the arm with a grip firm but not cruel. "Stop! It's over!" Michael commanded. No, you don't understand. He needed me, she sobbed, thrashing in his grasp. But Ranger stepped between them, planting himself as a barrier, low growl rising as if warning her to stay put. Security quickly surrounded her, and Michael, breathless, adrenaline high, read her Miranda rights. She slumped to the ground, spent. For a moment she seemed impossibly small, lost amid the echoing terminal, her hands cuffed in front of her. The crowd began to murmur, the initial shock fading into speculation, judgment, and, on a few faces, a flicker of understanding. Michael could feel the weight of their stares. Some filmed on their phones, others simply watched, anxious for answers. The lead detective on the case, Detective Harris, arrived in plain clothes, her face tight with concern. "Let's get her to holding for questioning. Good work, Walker." Michael nodded but felt anything but triumphant. His heart pounded. Every step of this ordeal had balanced on a razor's edge. If he'd doubted Ranger, if he'd hesitated, Cody might have disappeared forever. As Megan, if that was even her real name, was led away, Michael knelt by Ranger, ruffling his ears. "Good boy. You saved him, you know that?" Ranger licked his hand, eyes bright, tail thumping the floor. For just a moment, the storm outside felt a little less menacing. Michael's radio crackled. "Walker, report to interview room B, subject in custody, and bring Ranger." He straightened, glancing around at the onlookers, some still frozen, some already drifting back to their disrupted travel plans. The terminal, briefly a theater of fear and hope, slowly began to resume its old rhythm. But Michael knew that for Cody, for Diane, and for the woman now in custody, nothing would ever be the same. In the hallway, Diane appeared, face etched with exhaustion but blazing with gratitude. She reached for Michael's hand, squeezing it tight. You brought him back to me. I don't know how to thank you. That dog, he's a miracle." Michael managed a small smile. "Sometimes you just have to trust your partner." The words stuck with him as he walked to the holding room. Ranger stayed close, ears perked, sensing the tension and the weight of what they'd just averted. Inside the Stark interview room, Megan sat at the table, hands cuffed, staring at her reflection in the glass. She seemed oddly calm now, as if a mask had slipped. Michael took a seat across from her, setting Ranger at his feet. "We need to talk," he began, keeping his voice gentle but firm. "Who are you? And why Cody?" For a long moment, Megan didn't speak. Tears threatened but didn't fall. She stared at the wall, lips trembling, as if waging some internal battle. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Michael replied, glancing at Ranger for reassurance. The German Shepherd sat alert, eyes locked on Megan, as if sensing the truth was close, just waiting to be uncovered. The storm raged on, but inside the interrogation room, the real unraveling was just beginning. Rain hammered against the hospital windows, washing away the last traces of daylight as Officer Michael Walker sat hunched in a stiff plastic chair, shoulders weighed down by exhaustion. The hospital lobby was quiet except for the distant beeping of machines and the soft click of shoes on tile. Michael's uniform was damp from the storm, his badge flecked with raindrops and airport dust. Next to him, Ranger lay curled at his feet, his big brown eyes following every movement, ears flicking at each new sound. Cody Evans had been rushed in an hour ago, barely conscious, cheeks flushed, tiny hand limp in his grandmother's grasp. Diane Evans hadn't left her grandson's side for a moment. Through the sliding glass doors, Michael watched her now, sitting beside Cody's hospital bed, clutching the little boy's fingers, as if she could will him back to full strength. There was a tremor in her shoulders, the ghost of all the fear and guilt she had carried through the ordeal. Every few minutes, a nurse came in to check on Cody. His breathing had steadied, but the sedative in his system still had not worn off. The doctor's words rang in Michael's ears. "He's going to be okay, but it'll take time. Whatever he was given, he's lucky to be alive." Michael had already given his statement twice, once to the hospital's internal security and once by phone to the Bozeman police. Both times, the questions were the same. Did you see any signs of struggle? What made you suspect the woman? Was force necessary? Each answer left him feeling more unsettled. He could see it in the faces of his superiors and the social workers. Admiration, yes, but also suspicion. Did he cross a line? Had he acted too quickly, too aggressively? Now, in the lonely quiet, self-doubt crept in. Would another officer have trusted their dog's instincts? Or would they have written off Ranger's warning as overexcitement, a mistake easily overlooked in a crowded terminal? Ranger lifted his head, nose twitching, and whined softly. Michael leaned down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "It's all right, boy," he murmured, but his voice was thin and tired. "You did good. I just hope it was enough." He thought back to that moment at Gate 14, the chaos, the fear, the way the crowd had turned on a dime from annoyance to horror. He remembered Megan's, or whatever her name was, eyes, pleading, desperate, full of some pain he still didn't understand. He'd seen plenty of criminals, but something about her shook him. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't just a villain. Down the hall, a pair of detectives conferred quietly by the nurses' station. Michael caught snippets of their conversation. Possible kidnapping, Amber Alert, psychological trauma. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. All he could see was Cody's small face, so still and silent, and Diane's tears as she whispered to her grandson. He stood, stretching sore muscles, and approached the window into Cody's room. Diane glanced up, eyes rimmed with red, but fierce with determination. "He's a fighter," she said softly. "He's always been a fighter, even when his parents..." Well, he's had a hard year, but he'll come back. I know he will. Michael nodded, searching for something to say. He's lucky to have you. Diane shook her head, voice trembling. I should have been more careful. I let him out of my sight for 1 minute. Just 1 minute, and... She broke off, wiping her eyes. It's not your fault, Michael said gently. There are people in this world who look for opportunities. You couldn't have known. Diane squeezed Cody's hand tighter. How did you know? How did that dog? How did Ranger know? Michael looked down at Ranger, who sat at attention by the door, as if waiting for permission to enter. Sometimes you just have to trust the ones who see what you can't. He's got a nose for trouble. He's saved me more times than I can count. At Diane's nod, Michael opened the door and let Ranger inside. The big dog padded softly to Cody's bedside, sitting beside the little boy, laying his head gently on the mattress. Cody's fingers twitched, barely moving, but enough to find Ranger's fur. For a long moment, neither Diane nor Michael said a word. They just watched as the bond between child and dog bridged the gap that trauma had left. Later, after Diane dozed off in her chair and the hospital had quieted to a low murmur, Michael returned to the waiting area. There he found his supervisor, Captain Ray O'Connor, waiting for him with crossed arms and a stern look. Walker, need to talk. Michael followed him into a cramped conference room, the kind with cheap coffee and even cheaper chairs. O'Connor leaned forward. You want to walk me through why you didn't wait for backup before confronting the suspect? Michael kept his voice steady. Ranger alerted. He was adamant, more than I've ever seen him. The woman was evasive, the child wasn't moving, and time was running out. If I'd waited... You understand there are procedures for a reason, O'Connor interrupted. You put yourself and others at risk. If that had gone sideways... It didn't, Michael replied, perhaps more sharply than intended. The kid is safe. That's what matters. O'Connor studied him a moment, then sighed. You'll need to file a full report. There's going to be an inquiry. Public's already asking questions. I've got the press calling me nonstop. You know how this looks? Cop goes rogue, dog attacks innocent woman. At least that's how some people will spin it. Michael swallowed hard, the full weight of the day pressing on his chest. She wasn't innocent. Ranger knew, and if I had to do it again, I'd make the same call. O'Connor nodded, his tough exterior softening a little. I know, but that doesn't make this easier. Get some rest. You'll need it. Alone again, Michael leaned against the wall, pinching the bridge of his nose. He felt the gulf widening between what he'd done and what he was supposed to do, between the letter of the law and the spirit behind it. For the first time in years, he wondered if he really belonged in this job. Before he left, he checked on Cody one last time. The boy was still asleep, Ranger at his side, Diane murmuring lullabies to both of them. Michael felt a swell of gratitude for the dog who'd trusted his instincts, and a fierce hope that, somehow, things would turn out right. As he stepped into the rain-soaked night, Michael promised himself he'd see this through, no matter the cost. Because sometimes the line between hero and villain, right and wrong, was as thin as a lightning bolt in a Montana storm. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the sky outside Bozeman Hospital still bruised from the night's storm. Inside, Michael Walker nursed a bitter cup of coffee, dark circles under his eyes betraying a night with little sleep. The news had broken by sunrise. K-9 cop stops kidnapping at Bozeman Airport. Miracle dog saves missing child. Social media was ablaze with grainy videos, speculation, and endless debate. Michael avoided his phone, focusing instead on the paperwork piled in front of him. But it was the upcoming interview with the suspect, Megan Blake, as she called herself, that weighed heaviest on his mind. She'd barely spoken since her arrest. In her holding cell, she alternated between vacant stares and silent tears. The hospital staff said her vitals were stable, but her mind was clearly somewhere else. Detective Harris joined him at the door to the interview room. "You sure you're up for this?" she asked quietly. "You look like you could use a week in bed." Michael managed a weak smile. "Wouldn't miss it. Bring Ranger in too. Sometimes people talk more freely with a dog in the room." Harris arched an eyebrow but nodded. Ranger trotted in, tail wagging faintly, his presence somehow softening the edge of the sterile space. Michael sat across from the woman, sliding a notepad in front of him, but he didn't open with accusations. He just waited. Ranger settled at his feet, watching the woman with quiet patience. Megan didn't look up. Her hands shook in her lap, fingers tracing invisible patterns on her jeans. After several minutes of silence, Michael spoke, his voice gentle. "You know, when I was a kid, my dad used to say that sometimes the only way out of a storm is through it. Feels like you've been caught in a storm for a long time, doesn't it?" She flinched at his words, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, it looked like she might retreat again, but then she took a shaky breath and whispered, "My name isn't Megan. It's Rachel. Rachel Sloan." Michael nodded, quietly flipping to a fresh page. "Rachel, thank you for telling me. Can you help me understand what happened? Why Cody?" She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting to steady herself. I didn't want to hurt him, I swear. I thought he was my son." The words hung in the air, raw and trembling. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What made you believe that, Rachel?" She looked at Ranger, then back at Michael, as if searching for some anchor in the room. "After my son died, I couldn't get out of bed. My family tried, therapists tried, but nothing worked. I just kept seeing him everywhere. Then I met Dr. Merrick. He runs a place called Silver Springs Retreat. He said he specialized in healing trauma, especially for mothers who'd lost children." Michael felt a prickle of unease. He scribbled the name in his notebook. "What did he do there?" He convinced us that sometimes souls come back, that children lost too soon might be reborn in another. He said Cody was my son's soul. He looked at me one day, and he said, 'There he is. That's your boy, Rachel.' I know how crazy that sounds, but he made it feel real. He made me believe." Tears streamed down her face now, her shoulders racked with silent sobs. Michael let her cry, glancing at Harris, who watched with growing concern. Ranger crept closer, nuzzling Rachel's knee. She flinched, but then reached out, her trembling fingers stroking the dog's fur. "How long have you known Dr. Merrick?" Michael asked, voice as soft as he could manage. "Almost a year. There were other women, other mothers. Some stayed for weeks, some never left. He gave us therapy, medications, group sessions. He said if we followed the process, we'd see our children again. Some people tried to leave, but he always had a way of making them come back." Michael's jaw tightened. "Did you know Cody before the airport?" Rachel shook her head. "No, I was told to wait at the airport, that someone would bring my son to me. They gave me a blanket, something to keep him quiet if he was scared. When I saw Cody with his grandmother, I just took him. I thought it was my only chance." For a long moment, the room was silent. except for Rachel's ragged breathing and the distant hum of hospital machines. Michael's mind raced with questions about Silver Springs, about Dr. Merrick, about how many others had been manipulated like this. He scribbled notes, a deep unease settling into his bones. Detective Harris cleared her throat. "Do you remember what they gave you? Medication, instructions?" Rachel nodded, face pale. "There were pills. They said they'd help me stay calm, help the transition. I don't remember much after that. Just running, panic, Cody crying. Then nothing until the police found me." Michael slid a tissue box across the table, watching as she dabbed her eyes. "Thank you, Rachel. You're helping us understand. You're not the only one he's hurt, are you?" She shook her head. "There are others. Some women. They're still there. I tried to leave twice, but he said he'd call the police, that no one would believe me, that I'd never see my son again. I was so lost." Outside, the storm had passed, but the darkness inside Michael grew. He exchanged a look with Harris, who was already on her phone, likely calling in a search warrant for Silver Springs. Michael stood and offered Rachel a gentle nod. "We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise." As Michael and Ranger left the room, the air felt thick with dread. The retreat wasn't just exploiting grief. It was orchestrating something darker, something that preyed on the most vulnerable. Ranger whined, pawing at the ground, as if sensing the evil that lay beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, Michael drove out to Silver Springs. The facility sat on the edge of town, a sprawling property surrounded by pine trees and a wrought iron gate. The sign promised healing for heartbroken families. But as Michael and Ranger approached, the dog's fur bristled, and he began to pace anxiously. The front desk receptionist, a young woman with empty eyes and a too bright smile, watched Michael with practiced calm. "Dr. Merrick is out of town," she said, her voice flat. "You'll have to make an appointment." Michael flashed his badge. "We'll wait. And I want a list of every current resident and employee. Now." She hesitated, glancing nervously at Ranger, who growled softly, eyes trained on a door down the hall. Michael caught it, following Ranger's line of sight. Something about that closed door, it radiated secrecy, pain, the kind of shadow you can't sweep away. "Is there a problem?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Not yet," Michael replied, "but we're about to find out." Ranger's agitation was unmistakable. Michael's gut told him, whatever evil was hiding in Silver Springs, it was close, and time was running out. Darkness had fallen by the time Michael Walker parked his unmarked car outside the gates of Silver Springs Retreat. The pine trees lining the driveway stood tall and silent, their silhouettes wavering in the wind like silent witnesses. The sign at the entrance, "Healing for Heartbroken Families," glimmered softly in the headlights, but Michael felt only a cold knot of suspicion as he stepped out with Ranger. Alicia Turner, the former Silver Springs employee who'd reached out to the police after the airport incident, met Michael at the side gate. She was in her early 30s, with restless eyes and a nervous energy, glancing constantly over her shoulder, as if expecting Dr. Merrick himself to appear at any moment. "You sure you want to do this?" Alicia whispered, voice trembling. "If anyone catches us—" Michael shook his head, signaling her to keep quiet. "We're not breaking in. You still have your key card. Technically, we're guests." He looked down at Ranger, who sniffed the air and pressed close to his leg. "Let's move fast." They slipped through the gate and moved along the side of the main building. A heavy hush hung over the property. Most residents were likely asleep, sedated by Dr. Merrick's carefully dispensed pills. Lights burned only in Merrick's office and down one wing where private sessions were held. Michael kept low, Alicia leading the way, her hands shaking as she tapped her card on the door. Inside, the retreat felt nothing like a place of healing. It was clinical, unnaturally quiet. Family photographs, painted smiles, and motivational quotes lined the halls. Underneath the surface, Michael felt only dread. He signaled for Alicia to take him to the staff wing. They hurried down a narrow corridor, saw Ranger's ears perked, his nose twitching. He stopped at a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," pawing at it insistently. "That's the nursery," Alicia whispered. "Merrick keeps it locked. Says it's for special therapy." Michael tried the handle. Locked. Alicia quickly fished out a spare key from her pocket, hands shaking so badly she dropped it twice before finally opening the door. The room was dim, the air tinged with antiseptic. In the glow of a small lamp, Michael could see several bassinets lined up against one wall, some empty, some filled with old stuffed animals. The crib sheets were rumpled, bottles stacked in a mini-fridge nearby. On the far side of the room, a pile of folded blankets nearly concealed a small locked cabinet. Alicia moved to open it, but Ranger was already nudging at the baseboard, sniffing fiercely. Michael squatted beside Ranger, feeling along the wall until his fingers found a loose panel. With a soft click, it popped free. Behind it, a small stash of prescription bottles and plastic-wrapped syringes. "Diazepam, lorazepam," Michael read aloud, scanning the labels. "Powerful stuff. Way too much for grief therapy." Alicia's voice was barely a whisper. "He said it was to help mothers sleep, to keep the children quiet during transitions. But there were nights. Kids would cry, and then nothing. Silence. Sometimes for days." Michael's stomach twisted. "How many children?" Alicia shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know. Most of the women brought them in themselves. But some just appeared, and then vanished. When I asked questions, Merrick threatened to ruin me. He said nobody would believe a failed therapist." A noise in the hallway made both of them freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Michael signaled for silence, tucking the panel back and motioning Alicia and Ranger into the adjoining office. The office was a mess of file folders, patient charts, and handwritten notes. Alicia rummaged quickly, her hands finally steady. "Check the bottom drawer," she whispered. Michael yanked it open and found a set of meticulously kept therapy records, names, dates, medication logs, and detailed notes about parent-child reunification protocols. There was a separate ledger listing cash payments, signed off in Merrick's scrawl. One entry caught Michael's eye. "Cody Evans, initiated. Transfer scheduled 6/12, mother, Rachel Sloan." He snapped pictures with his phone, heart pounding. This is it. Proof Merrick was orchestrating the whole thing. He's not just manipulating these women. He's facilitating abductions. Suddenly, Ranger bristled, letting out a low, menacing growl. Alicia's eyes widened in panic. "Someone's coming. We have to go." Michael stuffed the files into his jacket and gestured for Alicia to stay close. Ranger took point, moving quietly but alert. The footsteps paused just outside the door. Then a flashlight beam swept across the glass. Michael pressed himself against the wall, steadying his breath, the tension thick enough to choke on. Through a crack in the door, he glimpsed a figure in a white coat. Dr. Merrick himself. The doctor paused, peering into the darkness, then moved on, keys jangling at his hip. "Let's go," Michael hissed. "Back exit." They retraced their steps, hearts racing, Ranger pausing every few feet to sniff the air. Halfway down the hall, Alicia grabbed Michael's arm. "Wait. The security cameras." Michael glanced up. Sure enough, a camera in each corner, but the monitors were all in the front office, and right now, they were banking on Merrick being too distracted to notice. They ducked into a small staff lounge, Ranger checking each shadow. Alicia found a laptop plugged into the wall. "We can erase the last 10 minutes. I know the password." Working fast, she navigated the system, wiping their images from the night's recordings. "Done, but we can't stay. If Merrick checks the files..." As they prepared to leave, Ranger stopped, growling at a closed door across the hall. Michael listened. Faint cries, muffled and terrified, echoed from inside. He kicked the door open, heart in his throat. Inside, 2 young women huddled together, eyes wide with terror. "Please help us," one of them whimpered. "He said he was bringing our children, but we never saw them again." Michael quickly untied them, promising, "You're safe now. Stay here, don't make a sound." They slipped out a side door, Ranger leading the way, their arms full of stolen records and the weight of what they'd witnessed. As they reached the fence, the sharp wail of an alarm pierced the night. "He knows," Alicia whispered, terror in her voice. "Merrick knows we're here." Michael shoved Alicia and Ranger ahead, heart thundering as they plunged into the trees behind Silver Springs. In the darkness, with Ranger guiding every step, Michael clung to the hope that what they'd uncovered would finally bring the whole house of cards down, and that no more children would be lost to the shadows of Silver Springs. Behind them, lights flickered on in every window. The retreat was awake, but so was the truth, and Michael knew he'd stop at nothing to see it brought to light. The sharp wail of the fire alarm split the night, echoing off the walls of Silver Springs retreat and carrying through the trees like a warning bell. Inside the building, lights flickered on and doors slammed as confusion rippled from room to room. For a heartbeat, Michael, Alicia, and Ranger stood frozen behind the hedge, the world holding its breath. "Move!" Michael barked, grabbing Alicia's arm and shoving her forward, his other hand gripping the evidence-stuffed folder. Ranger sprinted ahead, nose to the ground, leading them along the narrow strip of darkness behind the staff cottages. The sudden flood of lights from inside the retreat revealed shadows darting from window to window, voices shouting for order. They reached the perimeter fence, but as Alicia fumbled with the latch, Michael heard pounding footsteps, security guards in dark uniforms, flashlights cutting harsh circles through the branches. "There!" someone shouted, a beam finding Alicia's pale face. "Stop! Drop what you're holding!" Michael spun around, tucking the folder under his jacket. "Alicia, go!" he ordered. But Alicia froze, her eyes wide and terrified. Ranger snarled, stepping between Alicia and the approaching guards. His hackles rose, the warning clear. Michael dropped low, using the trees for cover, and searched for an opening. A security guard lunged, grabbing Alicia's shoulder. "You're not going anywhere!" she shrieked, wrenching free, as Michael charged the guard from behind. He tackled the man to the ground, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. Ranger lunged, barking fiercely, and another guard backed away, hands raised. A third guard swung a baton at Michael, but he ducked, the blow grazing his arm. In one fluid motion, he swept the guard's legs out and pinned him to the muddy ground. More footsteps. More shouting. In the distance, the unmistakable sound of police sirens. Someone must have triggered a silent alarm or dialed 911 when the fire alarm went off. Time was running out. Ranger barked, sprinting to Alicia's side. "This way," Michael called, dragging Alicia through a gap in the fence as Ranger darted after them. They bolted into the woods, branches whipping their faces, lungs burning. Behind them, flashlights zigzagged wildly, guards yelling. "They're headed to the creek! Cut them off!" But Michael knew the land better than most. He'd studied the area before coming, just in case. A thick wall of smoke suddenly billowed from the retreat, swirling out open windows. Someone had started a fire. Accident or arson, it didn't matter. The chaos was cover for their escape. They crashed through brush and stumbled down a shallow embankment to the edge of the creek. Alicia slipped, falling to her knees, but Michael yanked her up, pushing her across a fallen log. Ranger bounded through the water, pausing only to look back and make sure his people were close. His coat was streaked with mud, tongue lolling as he panted with exertion. Michael grinned at the sight. If Ranger could stay calm under fire, so could he. They reached the opposite bank and crouched low, catching their breath. Michael pressed a trembling hand to his bruised side. "Are you hurt?" he asked Alicia. She shook her head, voice shaky but determined. "No, just scared. Did we get enough evidence?" Michael checked the folder. Photographs, therapy records, medication logs, the ledger with Cody Evans's name. "It's more than enough. The police will need time to sort through it all, but it's enough to bring down Merrick and whoever's protecting him." A distant crash echoed through the woods. More shouting, now mixed with the pop of small explosions as the fire found chemicals in the therapy wing. Michael saw the flicker of flames lighting up the sky, the smoke rising in angry black columns. Alicia slumped against a tree, tears streaking her cheeks. "I should have said something sooner. So many kids." "You did the right thing," Michael told her. "Tonight, you saved lives." Suddenly, a new voice rang out through the trees, chilling in its calm. "Walker, you're trespassing. You and your friend need to come out, now." Michael recognized the tone instantly. Dr. Harold Merrick, his voice as smooth and clinical as ever, echoed through the darkness. Michael's muscles tensed. He'd been prepared for many outcomes, but not for Merrick himself to show up in the woods. Ranger bristled, growling low, and Michael motioned Alicia to stay down. Slowly, he rose from behind a tree, folder in one hand, flashlight in the other. Merrick emerged into the moonlight, flanked by 2 security guards. His white coat was spattered with soot, but his expression was eerily composed. "That folder belongs to the retreat. You have no right." Michael kept his eyes on the doctor. "You drugged women. You stole children. It's over, Merrick." Merrick smiled, lips thin and cold. "You don't understand. I help families. I heal them. But you're a threat to everything I've built." One of the guards edged closer, reaching for his holster. Michael tensed, ready to fight, but Ranger moved first. With a snarl, the German Shepherd lunged at the guard's legs, knocking him off balance. The second guard hesitated, uncertain, but Michael pressed his advantage. "Drop your weapon! Police are on their way! This is your last warning!" For a moment, everyone froze. In the distance, sirens drew closer, blue lights flickering through the trees. Merrick's confidence faltered, his eyes darting from Michael to Alicia, then to the rapidly approaching law enforcement. Smoke thickened the air, flames now visible above the trees. "We need to get out of here," Alicia shouted, grabbing Michael's sleeve. Merrick scowled, backing away. "This isn't over, Walker. You have no idea how deep this goes." He turned, disappearing into the darkness with one guard, the other limping after Ranger's bite. Michael watched them vanish, a sinking feeling in his gut. But then Ranger nudged his hand, reminding him there was still work to do. They hurried back through the trees, emerging onto the main road just as police cruisers roared up, officers spilling out and aiming their weapons at the retreat. Fire trucks pulled in behind, hoses already unspooling. "Hands up!" an officer shouted, but then another recognized Michael. "Walker, what the hell? Are you all right?" Michael handed over the folder. "Evidence. Merrick's inside, probably armed. He's the one you want." As firefighters raced into the smoke and police stormed the retreat, Michael collapsed onto the grass, Ranger flopping beside him. Alicia wept in relief, hugging her knees to her chest. "Is it really over?" she asked. Michael watched the flames consuming Silver Springs, the end of a nightmare but also the beginning of a long reckoning. "It's not over yet, but it will be. I promise." He looked at Ranger, his partner, his protector, the one who never hesitated when lives were at stake. Together they had faced the darkness and made it out. But Michael knew that some scars, on the mind, on the soul, would take much longer to heal. The fire at Silver Springs Retreat burned long into the dawn, its smoke curling over the hills of Bozeman as police and firefighters worked side by side. Michael Walker watched it from a folding chair at the edge of the chaos, Ranger curled at his feet, the adrenaline of the night slowly ebbing into exhaustion. In his lap rested the file folder, the damning records of Dr. Harold Merrick's criminal operation. As the sun climbed, headlines started to flood every newsfeed. Cult at Montana Retreat exposed. Police investigating years of disappearances. Hero K9 saves lives. Corrupt therapist flees into night. But Michael felt no triumph. The job was far from done. The evidence they'd collected painted a chilling picture. Stolen children, sedated and passed between grieving parents. Women groomed and gaslit by a man they'd trusted with their deepest wounds. But Merrick was gone. By midday, the investigation's focus had shifted to a manhunt. Michael, despite being the hero in every story, was called into the police station for questioning. Captain O'Connor met him at the door, his expression grave. "They want to talk to you about Silver Springs. Internal Affairs, CPS, the DA's office. Everyone's got questions." Michael nodded. He understood. When a cop broke protocol, even for the right reasons, there was always a price. He sat for hours under the harsh fluorescent lights, repeating the night's events again and again. "Did you have a warrant? Why didn't you wait for backup? Were you aware that your actions put civilians at risk?" Each question stung, but Michael held fast to the truth. "We didn't have time. Every second counted. There were children inside. If I'd hesitated, people would have died." Ranger, who'd been waiting outside, was finally allowed in. The mood shifted instantly. The officers, even the stone-faced investigator, softened at the sight of the big German shepherd, now bandaged from a scrape but proud and alert. For a few moments, Michael could breathe. After the formalities, Michael and Alicia Turner were kept under protective custody. Merrick's reach, it turned out, was long. There were whispers of donations to judges, secret accounts, even off-duty cops on his payroll. Michael's evidence had pulled back the curtain, but the danger was far from over. The turning point came when Diane Evans and a handful of families pressed charges, their voices broadcast on every major channel. They spoke not just of their grief, but of the hope that had been manipulated, and the courage of those who stopped it. Diane's tearful thanks to Michael and Ranger struck a chord with the nation. He listened when no one else would. "He saved my grandson because he trusted his partner and his heart." The public's support brought momentum, but also pressure. The district attorney was determined to make an example of Merrick. Leads poured in, and within days, detectives tracked Merrick to a secluded cabin deep in the Bitterroot Mountains. Michael, despite the suspension still hanging over his badge, was called in for his expertise, and because, as the DA put it, no one knows the man or the terrain better. They left at dawn in a convoy of cruisers and unmarked SUVs. The plan was swift and simple. Surround the cabin, breach on command. But nothing about Merrick was ever simple. As they approached, Michael felt Ranger's tension through the leash. The forest was silent, the cabin hidden among the pines. They advanced in teams, flashlights cutting through the mist, radios whispering instructions. Suddenly, a child's cry echoed from inside. Michael's heart clenched. There were more victims. "Go, Ranger!" he whispered. The dog darted ahead, circling the porch, sniffing at a cellar door. Detective Harris gave the order. "Move! Move! Move!" They breached. The front door burst open, splinters flying. Merrick, wild-eyed, held a pistol, using a small, terrified girl as a human shield. Two more children cowered behind an upturned table. "Put the gun down, Harold!" Michael shouted, stepping into the room, hands raised. "It's over! You have nowhere to go!" Merrick's eyes darted, sweat running down his face. "You ruined everything! You think they'll thank you for this? You're just like the rest, small-minded, cruel, punishing the only man willing to heal what can't be fixed." Michael edged closer, voice calm but steely. "These children don't need healing from you. Let them go." Merrick's finger tightened on the trigger. In the split second before he could fire, Ranger sprang. The dog leapt between Michael and Merrick, knocking the gun aside. The gun went off, one deafening bang echoing through the cabin. Michael felt the bullet sear past him. Then he saw Ranger hit the floor, blood blossoming on his flank. "No!" Michael cried, dropping to his knees, heart lurching as Ranger yelped in pain. The officers surged forward, wrestling Merrick to the ground as he screamed and kicked. Harris cuffed him, Miranda rights drowned out by the girl's sobs and the roar in Michael's ears. Michael pressed his hands to Ranger's wound, desperate. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me." Ranger's breath came in short pants. His eyes locked on Michael's face, unwavering even through the pain. "Medic! We need a medic in here, now!" Harris shouted, pulling the rescued children to safety. Outside, the world narrowed to sirens and shouts, but Michael only saw Ranger. "You're the bravest soul I've ever known," he whispered. "You did good, partner. You did good." As the paramedics rushed in, Michael refused to let go. They loaded Ranger onto a stretcher, oxygen mask over his snout. The dog's tail thumped once as if to say, "I'm not leaving you yet." Merrick was dragged away in cuffs, snarling about innocence and salvation. Michael barely heard. He followed the ambulance, praying with every mile. The news broke within the hour. Silver Springs children rescued, Merrick in custody, hero dog fighting for his life. The city held its breath, rooting for Ranger, for the children, for justice to finally be done. But for Michael, the battle was not only with the law, but with his own conscience. He had bent the rules, risked his badge, his life, and Ranger's. Now, holding Diane's hand outside the ER and watching Cody cling to Ranger's paw, Michael understood the true weight of his choices. In that moment, surrounded by sirens, headlines, and hope, he knew one thing for sure. Sometimes justice means breaking the rules. Sometimes the law needs a heart behind the badge. And sometimes, the best partner you'll ever have is the one who trusts you, no matter what. The days following Dr. Merrick's arrest felt oddly suspended, as if time itself was holding its breath. The people of Bozeman moved through a haze of shock and relief. On the local news, the story played on repeat. Harrowing footage of the rescue, grainy images of crying children carried to safety, and above all, the image of Ranger, bandaged, hooked to IVs, fighting for his life in the ICU. For Michael Walker, every moment in the hospital was a blur. He'd spent nights sprawled in a plastic chair, head bowed at Ranger's bedside, haunted by memories of gunfire and that split second when everything could have been lost. Sometimes he would reach out, hand resting on Ranger's broad head, listening to the rise and fall of his breathing. The dog's flank was shaved and stitched, pain meds dulling his gaze, but every now and then, his tail would thump at the sound of Michael's voice. It was the only sign Michael needed. His partner was still fighting. Cody Evans became a near-constant presence in those halls. The little boy, still shaken and mostly silent, refused to leave Ranger's side. Diane would try to coax him away. "Come on, sweetheart, let Ranger rest." But Cody would just shake his head and burrow closer, one small hand always tangled in Ranger's fur. Michael saw the change in the boy's eyes. The nightmares still clung, but when Ranger was near, Cody's breathing slowed, his trembling stilled. They were both survivors, marked in ways no one else could see. The hospital staff marveled at the bond. Nurses who'd once shooed dogs from the building now made quiet exceptions. "Therapy dog," they'd whisper, though Ranger was so much more. Michael watched as children from other rooms shuffled in, drawn to the silent comfort the dog seemed to radiate. A girl with a cast signed by all her friends sat beside Cody, tracing the shape of Ranger's ear. A teenager whose nightmares kept him awake at night rested his head on the dog's side, at peace for the first time in days. It was Diane who first voiced what everyone was feeling. She sat with Michael in the early mornings, the two of them sharing cheap coffee in silence. "He's changed all our lives, hasn't he?" she said, watching Cody sleep beside Ranger. "That dog's got a heart bigger than any of us." Michael nodded, voice thick. "I owe him everything. I can't help thinking about how close we came to losing him, to losing Cody." Diane squeezed his arm. "You brought them both back. You saved them. You saved me too, in a way." Michael let that settle. In truth, he didn't feel like a hero. The headlines and the public praise were a shield against what he actually felt. Guilt, relief, exhaustion, and a hollow ache for the mothers who'd never see their children again. He knew how trauma could twist people, leave scars deeper than any bullet wound. The other families, women who'd been lured to Silver Springs, their children rescued, began to gather, forming an impromptu support group in the hospital's family room. They came in waves. A mother who'd flown in from Utah, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. A father who hadn't slept in days, hugging his son so tightly the boy squeaked. There was comfort in numbers. They traded stories, cried together, clung to each other. In time, even Michael found himself drawn in, sharing coffee and laughter, talking openly for the first time about what it meant to survive. As Ranger's condition stabilized, talk of recovery became talk of hope. Michael realized just how deeply the trauma had shaped him. He'd always believed in right and wrong, in the thin blue line. But the ordeal at Silver Springs had forced him to question everything. Rules mattered, but so did instincts. Sometimes, following your heart was the only way out. Word spread through the hospital of Ranger's slow improvement. Local news crews gathered, hoping for a glimpse of the famous dog. Kids made cards, "Get well soon, Ranger," and taped them to the glass of his recovery room. Police officers visited, dropping off treats and saluting the K-9 who'd taken a bullet for his partner. But the deepest healing happened in moments without cameras. One afternoon, Michael watched Cody approach Ranger with a crumpled photo, a picture of his family before everything fell apart. The boy pressed it into Michael's hand, then, voice barely a whisper, said, "Can Ranger come home with me?" Diane's breath caught. Michael crouched beside Cody, brushing a tear from the boy's cheek. "Ranger will always be there for you, Cody. You're his friend. We're family now, okay?" The words made something shift. Cody leaned forward, pressing his forehead to Ranger's. Michael felt his own eyes burn. He realized then that the road to healing wouldn't be easy or fast. Cody might never speak of the nights at Silver Springs. Ranger would always carry his scar. Michael himself would wake up some mornings tangled in regret. But they weren't alone. A few days later, as the hospital prepared to discharge Ranger, Michael and Diane began to talk about building something new, something that could help more children heal. The idea took root over bad coffee and sleepless nights. What if they started a therapy program for trauma survivors, pairing dogs like Ranger with kids who needed comfort? They could call it Ranger's Haven, a place where broken hearts could find each other and begin to mend. The idea spread among the support group. Volunteers offered space, others donated supplies, and soon the first steps were underway. Ranger, still limping but fiercely proud, became the program's first therapy dog. Michael took charge of training, using every lesson the case had taught him about trust, resilience, and second chances. That summer, Bozeman saw a transformation. Families once broken by tragedy found hope among the laughter of children and the steady presence of loyal dogs. Diane led workshops for parents, sharing what she'd learned about loss and healing. Alicia, the brave whistleblower, found purpose in helping other survivors. Even Detective Harris stopped by, dropping off homemade cookies and reminding Michael that sometimes the best work happened outside the badge. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the windows of Ranger's Haven, Cody ran laughing through the garden, Ranger bounding at his side. For the first time since the ordeal, Michael heard the boy's laughter, clear, high, and full of promise. It was the sound of hope returning, the beginning of something that would last. The scars remained, for all of them, but they wore them like badges now, reminders of how far they'd come and how much further they could go. Michael sat on the porch with Diane, watching Cody and Ranger play. "We'll never forget," Diane said softly, "but we can build something new. That's all anyone can do." Michael nodded, feeling peace for the first time in months. He looked at Ranger, his partner, his friend, his silent guardian, and knew that together they'd turned pain into purpose. The weeks after Dr. Merrick's arrest brought a quiet, unfamiliar stillness to Michael Walker's life. For months, he'd lived at the edge of crisis, phone buzzing with urgent calls, mind racing from emergency to emergency, heart wound tight as a spring. Now, with the headlines fading and the public turning its attention elsewhere, Michael found himself face to face with silence, with memory, and with the slow work of healing that couldn't be rushed by deadlines or spotlights. Ranger's recovery was steady but slow. The bullet wound had been deep, and though the stitches were out and the fur was growing back, the German shepherd, once tireless, now moved with care. Gone was the reckless dash through airports or forests. Instead, Ranger had become a sentinel, quiet, watchful, almost wise. Michael spent long hours beside him, sometimes just sitting in the yard of Ranger's Haven, the program now bustling with the laughter of children and the gentle woofs of therapy dogs. But beneath that calm, the questions lingered. Michael often found himself replaying the night at Silver Springs. What if he'd hesitated? What if he'd doubted Ranger's warning? Would Cody have made it home? Would more families have suffered? The line between instinct and protocol, between justice and mercy, seemed thinner than ever, blurred by memory, haunted by what could have been. The program was flourishing. Dozens of families from Bozeman, and even farther afield, now brought their children to Ranger's Haven. There, under Diane's gentle guidance, survivors met every week. They shared stories, some broken, some hopeful, offering each other the kind of understanding that could only come from those who had lived through the storm. Diane herself had transformed from grieving grandmother into a pillar of support, her soft voice and fierce hugs a source of strength for newcomers. She spent hours with Cody, gently coaxing him to trust the world again. The little boy, who'd once refused to speak, now whispered secrets into Ranger's fur and sometimes even smiled. Michael was there for every meeting, often standing quietly at the edge of the group, watching and listening. He saw Ranger move among the children, patient and gentle, never flinching when small hands tugged his ears or when frightened kids curled up against his side. There was a lesson in Ranger's calm, that sometimes real guardianship wasn't about heroics or confrontation, but about presence, patience, and the willingness to simply be there, even when words fell short. As the weeks went by, Michael began to understand that the most important choices in life were rarely clear-cut. Sometimes courage meant trusting what you felt in your bones, even when you couldn't explain it, even when it meant risking censure or misunderstanding. The world needed rules, yes, but it also needed people willing to break them for the right reasons. Rachel Sloane's fate haunted him. The system treated her as both victim and perpetrator, a woman manipulated by Merrick, driven to madness by grief, and in the eyes of many, unforgivable. Michael thought often of her confusion and pain, the way trauma had twisted her intentions into something dangerous. He realized that the line between rescuing someone and condemning them was often just a matter of timing and compassion. The difference, he understood now, was the ability to see brokenness in others and meet it with understanding instead of punishment. At home, Michael felt the shift most acutely. He had always prided himself on being a protector, strong, reliable, unflinching in the face of chaos. But the ordeal had changed him. He was quicker to listen, slower to judge, more patient with those whose pain was invisible. He talked with Diane about starting a scholarship fund for mothers in need. He worked with local schools, sharing his experience so teachers could spot the signs of trauma sooner. And always, he credited Ranger for teaching him what a decade in law enforcement never could. Sometimes, the purest acts of heroism are silent, unnoticed, and fiercely loyal. Cody, meanwhile, clung to Ranger as if the dog were his lifeline. He still rarely spoke, except in the company of Ranger, but his world was expanding, one laugh, one brave step at a time. One afternoon, as Michael sat on the porch watching the sun set, Cody climbed onto his lap and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Michael. Thank you for bringing Ranger back." Michael hugged the boy, feeling the sting of tears. "Ranger came back for you, kid. He always will." The bonds between them, Michael, Diane, Cody, and Ranger, were not the kind of family written in blood or law, but they were forged by something even deeper: shared pain, shared hope, and the decision to face the world together. In the Haven, there was space for everyone: survivors, fighters, the lost, and the healing, all learning that scars didn't have to mean endings. The town itself seemed changed. Where once there had been suspicion about Michael's actions, about the truth behind Silver Springs, there was now respect and even gratitude. The police department, once focused only on protocol, began to adopt new training for dealing with trauma and listening to their K-9 teams more closely. The press eventually lost interest, but not before Michael used every interview to talk about the importance of empathy, the need to see beyond rules and headlines, and the heroism of the animals and families who'd survived. Sometimes, at night, Michael would sit alone on the porch, Ranger's head on his knee, and reflect on everything he'd learned. He knew the scars would never fully disappear, on Ranger, on Cody, on himself. But he also knew that scars could be the wellspring of wisdom, compassion, and courage if he let them. They were proof that he'd faced the darkness and chosen, again and again, to seek the light. He remembered the words Diane spoke at the first Haven meeting. "We can't go back, but we can go forward, and we can help each other heal." That, Michael realized, was the lesson at the heart of everything. That real justice isn't just about punishment, but about mercy, forgiveness, and the courage to act with empathy, especially when the world expects otherwise. As summer slipped into fall and the laughter in Rangers Haven grew louder, Michael felt hope returning, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd survived. The world could be dark, but here in this small patch of Montana, kindness and courage had turned pain into purpose. And as he looked down at Ranger, eyes steady and loyal, Michael knew the story was far from over. The greatest legacy was not in medals or headlines, but in the lives changed, the wounds slowly healing, and the promise that, no matter what storms lay ahead, there would always be someone ready to stand watch and protect. Months slipped by, and the sharp edges of that terrible summer slowly softened. Bozeman, Montana, found a new kind of peace. Where once the town had been defined by scandal, fear, and the headlines about Silver Springs, it was now remembered as the place where hope had fought its way back. One child, one dog, one act of courage at a time. For Michael Walker, each day began before sunrise. He'd rise quietly, careful not to wake Cody, and slip outside with Ranger. The air was always crisp in those early hours, and as Michael watched the first hints of light break over the distant mountains, he found himself breathing easier than he had in years. He no longer checked the news in dread, or scrolled through messages from reporters. The world's spotlight had moved on, and the quiet, he realized, was a gift. Rangers Haven had become more than just a project. It was now a community. The old house and its sprawling yard were filled with the joyful noise of children at play and the steady, comforting presence of therapy dogs. Parents, once strangers bonded by trauma, now chatted over coffee while their kids learned to laugh again. Some children came from Bozeman, others from as far as Billings or even out of state, each carrying scars the world rarely saw. Michael saw those scars reflected in his own life. For years, he'd measured his worth in arrests made, cases closed, rules followed. Now he understood that some victories couldn't be tallied. Sometimes, the smallest miracle, a frightened child whispering a first word in months, or a mother daring to hope again, mattered more than any medal. Cody was the heart of Rangers Haven. He and Ranger were inseparable, exploring the fields, reading together under the shade of an ancient oak, or curling up by the fire on cold evenings. Though he still rarely spoke in public, Cody had found his voice with Ranger. One autumn afternoon, as Michael tidied up the therapy room, he heard it. A small, soft word drifting through the hallway. Ranger. It was Cody's first word since the ordeal. Michael stood in the doorway, silent tears of gratitude in his eyes. In that moment, all the pain and chaos of the past year seemed to transform into something else, something stronger. The news of Cody's breakthrough spread quickly, and soon families everywhere were sending letters, emails, and donations to support Rangers Haven. Michael was invited to speak at schools, police conferences, and even city council meetings. But whenever he stood before a crowd, he gave the credit to his partner. "Ranger taught me to listen," he'd say, voice steady, "to trust instinct, to show compassion, and to never give up, even when hope seems impossible." Diane Evans, once just a grieving grandmother, became a leader and advocate. She volunteered every week, guiding new families through their first uncertain steps toward healing. She spoke about the darkness she had faced, but also about the light she had found, about the importance of community, of listening to children, of fighting for those who cannot speak for themselves. Under her guidance, Rangers Haven expanded to offer workshops, group therapy, and even a small memorial garden for families who could not bring their children home. Even Alicia Turner, who had risked everything to blow the whistle on Silver Springs, found her place at the Haven. She organized volunteer dog-walking teams and taught classes about resilience, honesty, and the importance of standing up, even when it was frightening to do so. Michael watched her laugh with the children and realized that she, too, had found a new beginning. The Bozeman Police Department held a ceremony to honor Michael and Ranger. Local leaders gave speeches, medals were awarded. But when it was Michael's turn to speak, he kept it simple. He looked out at the crowd, saw Diane wiping away tears, Alicia standing proud, and Cody clutching Ranger's collar. "I'm proud of the work we do in law enforcement," Michael began. "But tonight, I want to honor those who don't wear a badge. Those who fight through pain, who show up for each other, who heal together. Ranger is a hero, yes. But he's also a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust, love, and never give up on hope." He paused, catching Ranger's steady gaze. Guardianship isn't about power or authority. It's about listening to those who can't speak, standing up for those who can't stand for themselves, and remembering that every act of kindness changes the world just a little bit. After the applause faded, Michael felt the last of his old doubts ease. He'd spent months wondering if he'd done the right thing, if he'd crossed too many lines. Now, he understood that sometimes the rules were meant to be broken, especially if they kept you from doing what was right. In the months that followed, Rangers Haven grew. Other therapy dogs joined the program, rescues like Ranger, who knew what it meant to be lost and found. Families found comfort among new friends. Children who'd been silent for months found laughter in the company of dogs who never judged, never demanded, only offered warmth and acceptance. As autumn gave way to winter, Michael found himself reflecting more on what it meant to heal. The trauma of Silver Springs had left wounds that would never fully vanish, but it had also planted the seeds of something better. Ranger had shown him the power of loyalty, patience, and quiet courage. Diane had taught him the importance of community and second chances. Cody had reminded him that even the smallest voice could change the world. One evening, Michael sat on the porch with Diane and Alicia, watching Cody and the other children play. Ranger lay at his feet, older now but still vigilant, his eyes tracking every movement. The air was crisp, stars just beginning to blink to life above the mountains. Diane leaned over, her voice warm. "We're a family now, aren't we?" Michael smiled, nodding. "The best kind. The kind you choose." As the sun set behind the pines, Michael understood the true legacy of all they had endured. Kindness in the face of cruelty, hope in the shadow of fear, and the knowledge that healing was possible, even after the darkest night. The world was full of pain, but it was also full of people willing to help, to forgive, to fight for what was right. He looked down at Ranger, his partner, his friend, his teacher, and whispered, "We made it, buddy. We really made it." The scars remained, but so did the laughter, the friendships, and the unbreakable bond that had carried them all through the storm. In the end, Michael realized, it wasn't the pain that defined them, but the courage to turn pain into purpose, and the promise that no one, not ever, would have to face the darkness alone.